Well, shall I give my name? My name
Sure,
is,
go ahead.
My name is Wes Shepard, Weston B. Shepard Jr. And I was graduated from high school in Branford, Connecticut in 1941. And Pearl Harbor had already, it hadn't occurred, had it? No. But Pearl Harbor happened, and of course you know what that did to all the young people in this country. They just couldn't wait to get into a position where they could retaliate. It was such a horrible thing. And subsequently, three of us went up to Springfield, Massachusetts. I was living in Branford, Connecticut at the time. And three of us went up to Springfield, and we were going to enlist in the Marine Corps. And in the process of the physical, this Navy commander was walking behind a group of people, and he stood behind me and said, "Where's this man going?" And someone said, "Paris Island." And he said, "Not with that leg, he isn't." I had a little varicose vein, which at 92 I still have. It never bothered me. So they went off in the Marines, and I went back home and worked for a while, and then I enlisted in the Navy, and I can't tell you the exact date that I enlisted, but I can tell you that my term was 3 years, 3 months, and 28 days. And I enlisted. I went to Newport, Rhode Island, to boot camp, and that was an 8-week thing, I believe. And then you had, if you did certain things properly, they had tests and that sort of thing, and if you achieved a certain level, they allowed you to select the kind of school that you were going to go to. And a fellow who I'd met up with from Boston, Jack Sheehan, good Irish kid, they listed all the schools on the bulletin board, and we went down. And now remember, we were just kids, 17, 18, and the schools were listed, and they came to one that said ARM School. And I said to Mr. Sheehan, my buddy there, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, that's that armed guard school. You get on freighters, you know, and you go back and forth between New York and London, and you know, you can have liberty on each end and live it up and all that kind of stuff, you know." So we thought that was maybe a good way to help the war effort out, I guess you could say. So we signed up for ARM school and ended up at Aviation Radioman School in Jacksonville, Florida. That's how I got into radio school. And that was an 8-week thing, and back in that day, the word radar, if you mentioned the word radar off base, it was a capital offense, and you could be tossed into the brig, but yet you could find that word in the comic books. Anyway, we got through with the school, and I ended up, I forget exactly, I had my first flight at Jacksonville Naval Air Station one Sunday afternoon. I went down and had you could bum a ride with the people and with the pilots. And I took off in a PBY 5A. That's a great big seaplane with blisters on either side. And they were going off on glide bombing practice, and I can tell you how unsophisticated that was. We got out there, and there was a boat towing a target spar, and it tossed up a wake. And they had a guy laying on his belly with a trap door open and a smoke bomb in his hand. And the pilot's flying along on course, and he says, "Let her go," and the guy lets go, and you can see where the smoke bomb would come close to the target sometimes. And that was my first time being off the ground. Anyway, I can't remember exactly how I got picked for a squadron. Oh, I know what it was. The next thing after the radio school was gunnery school. They took us over to an airfield just outside of Jacksonville, Yellowwater, I think it was. They had a gunnery range out there. We shot everything you could think of: skeet, trap with shotguns. Even had shotguns mounted in turrets, and you'd holler pull, they'd let the trap go, and you'd swing your turret. You had a Mark 7 ring sight, and you had out there, and you would shoot the clay pigeons with a shotgun from a turret, which was kind of fun. And then we got assigned to squadrons, and I ended up in a dive bomber squadron. It was actually what it was. It was not a complete dive bomber squadron. It was part of what they called CASU, which is Carrier Aircraft Service. And they had 5 fighter planes, 10 each, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighter planes. That made a complement to put on a carrier. Now, they all trained in different places. The dive bombers trained in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, which was the home of a Pitcairn Autogyro. And it was a real family affair. There was no fences around the base. Civilians were all over the place. They were cooking meals for us and all that kind of stuff. And it was very unmilitary-like, but it was expedient. It got things going. And we trained, and then we were ready to move forward. We left there and went down to Pleasantville Naval Air Station, which today is it's in back Atlantic City. It's a huge government aeronautical center where I'm not quite sure what they do, but it's a very active place. And when we were there, it was just 2 little wooden hangars and 9 dive bombers and 9 torpedo bombers and 9 fighter planes. And we trained there and did training things up and down. I can remember some of the crazy things. We had one pilot that I was flying with. He flew up the beach at Atlantic City and went up over the pier. He did. Like that, up over the pier, and we were waving at the girls on the beach, you know. And he hit a seagull with the wing of the plane. Thank God it wasn't a prop. Put a big dent in the front of the wing. If it hit the prop, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you, I don't think. Then it came time to go to board the carrier, and we didn't fly aboard. The pilots flew aboard, and with all the baggage in the rear seat. And we went by tugboat. What a romantic way to go aboard an aircraft carrier. And I remember we were about 30, 40 miles off the shore. They were worried about subs then, because subs were up and down the Atlantic big time. And we stood on the gunnel of the tugboat with a rope ladder hanging down from the top. And I had a bosun's mate there standing, and he had a hold of you, and he said, "Now, kid, when that ladder comes down and I tell you to grab it, you grab it." And you did that, and the next thing you know, you were 15 feet in the air, and you started climbing, and you got up to the top. People grabbed you and pulled you up to safety. And we went cruising. Had some of the what I considered the most dangerous flights I had was on that trip. They flew patrols. They would get up 4 SBDs every morning before dawn, and they'd launch 4 planes. 2 you would go forward. You'd separate till you were 40 miles apart from the course that the carrier was going to go on, and then you'd fly 100 miles ahead, looking for submarines or signs or activity of submarines. And then you'd fly 50 miles port or starboard, and then you'd fly the interception leg back. And there was no radio communication, except the carrier was transmitting a signal with a directional antenna. And it would transmit every day. It changed. It'd be a Morse code, and you could pick up that particular code, that letter, and home in on it, and that would bring you back to the carrier. But they had the option of moving if they ran into problems. If a submarine appeared, if they had to take evasive actions, they could change course. And it could be difficult to find home. So anyway, and we went through the Panama Canal, and we went up to Hawaii, just passengers. And when we got out there, apparently this was the time they began to be thinking about the ground war in the Solomon Islands and the land, coming up through there. So they took all the dive bombers and the torpedo bombers off these carriers. There were four of them: the Trinidad, the Bellawood, the Monterey, and the Cowpens. They were converted cruisers. And they took all the dive bombers and torpedo bombers and loaded them on one great big carrier, and we headed for New Caledonia down in the South Pacific. Stopped at Samoa on the way, watched the people dive for coins, and the naked women running around in the canoes and all that stuff. And we got to New Caledonia, and that was a great, what's the word, staging area for the surge up through the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, and that sort of thing. And we flew, kept busy and practiced training and that kind of stuff. And then eventually we headed up and we flew into Guadalcanal. And the ground battle was over when we got there, but there still, it was occupied by U.S. forces, but the Japs were still out in the hills. And we flew submarine patrol in the north of Guadalcanal up towards New Georgia and up that way. And I never flew any missions out of Guadalcanal. But then we moved forward, and I forget the name of the little island we went to. But there was one little secondary spot that we stopped, and I don't remember. We were there for a very short time. But the next place I went was the island of New Georgia, and Munda Airstrip, M-U-N-D-A, which today is a commercial airport. At that time, it was a coral strip, and they constructed it under the palm trees were there, and they did a lot of work with netting and everything, and they built a lot of that airstrip without it being observed by other people. The Japs did that, and we bombed the bejeepers out of that place. And then we were stationed there, and we used to fly from Munda. Well, I'll tell you about a typical mission would be you'd launch, several P-38s, the Army that would fly heavy, high altitude fighter cover. And we were really attached to the Marine Corps. We were attached to Marine Air Wing 1. And just where that took place, I don't know, but Marine Air Wing 1 ended up telling us, running our campaign. And we would launch, 25, 30, 40 SBDs, maybe same number of torpedo bombers and fighter planes. And we'd fly up, and I'm trying to think of the Kahili Airstrip. That was also on New Georgia, and that was it. And we used to bomb that. That was the place, if you'll remember, the Kahili Airstrip is where the Japanese admiral got shot down. He was coming down to see what was going on, I guess. And anyway, that's where he got shot down. And then ultimately that whole place was taken over by the American forces. And we lived up in the hills there. And I don't know, somewhere I've got pictures of those hills. But here's a picture of it, right here. That's where we kind of lived. The tent pitched on a coral. Cot was up on 50-gallon drums with a mosquito bar around it so that the rats wouldn't get in. And the other interesting animal was what they call land crabs. Certain times of the year, these crabs about the size of a blue crab, so big, they'd come out of the water by the thousands, crawl over the coral airstrip. An airplane would land and crush them. The hot sun would bake them. They'd be pulverized, and you'd be down that way and somebody'd turn a plane around and the dust would fly and you'd be perspiring and this fish dust would kind of cover you up. It was a mess. And we flew quite a few strikes out of there, and our target was Rabaul, and it was a long haul from Rabaul up to from New Georgia to Rabaul. I don't know, it would be a 4 or 5 hour trip or something like that. And we just kept doing that. We would fly sometimes every other day. And I never kept track of the number of missions I flew for quite a while. It just was happening. I didn't even know about a flight log or anything like that. And our food was terrible, and it was more important to get ammunition and gasoline and that kind of stuff up than food, I guess. And typical meal, first off, I'll tell you, we would fly for 8 weeks, and then we would have to go, we would get a month off and we'd go down to Australia for an area and then get back up into the combat zone. And you did that 3 times, 2 times to Australia after your missions, and then the 3rd time, after your 3rd tour, you came home. And the airfields on Bougainville were covered with this metal strip. The CBs would come ashore, the bulldozer would knock the trees down, and they'd build an airstrip in such a short period of time to make your hair stand on end. You couldn't believe how fast they could do that. And I always had a soft spot in my heart for the CBs. They were older guys, skilled carpenters and tradesmen and everything, and they worked. They really worked hard. We flew and then we just goofed off when we were back on the ground. We just, played like kids. From Bougainville, we went up to Green Island, which is a really beautiful tropical atoll. And inside the horseshoe, it was beautiful, shallow water, just like a Dorothy Lamour movie. And off the backside, it was maybe 40, 50 feet down to the Pacific, and the natives had taken tree trunks and burned holes in them and put sticks through so you could have a ladder. And we went down there, and the CBs had fixed up a cable that went out into the Pacific, maybe 50 yards, 150 feet. And from it, they had tied ropes with a little wooden handle on the end, and it was just these swells, and you could go down, the rocks were smooth, you go hand over hand out in the cable, grab a hold of the handles on the ropes, and the swells would wash you around. It was nice and cool. And then from there, we were still bombing Rabaul. Our target was Rabaul. That was the mission, to decimate that place. And I guess we did, because when we weren't, the Army was in there with high-level, high-altitude bombing, but we were dive bombing, and our targets were primarily boats, ships tied up to the wharfs, and the anti-aircraft gun emplacements. And you'd be diving at the gun that's shooting at you. So that was always kind of interesting. And you'd see a black puff of smoke if it was in front of you on the way down, because you'd spend your time looking over your shoulder to see where you were going, because we were facing aft to take care of any fighter and stuff. I forgot to mention that on occasion we did get the opportunity to shoot at a Japanese aircraft. I never shot any down, but I had a close experience one time. We were flying an artillery spotting mission when they were when the Marines were coming ashore. There were Japanese artillery emplacements a couple miles inland, and we were spotting our fire on them, telling them what they were doing. And all of a sudden, from up and underneath me, I was looking aft, and here appeared a Japanese plane. And I had my guns were over on this side of the tail, and we had nothing to keep you from shooting your tail off. So I brought my around like this, and while I'm doing this, he didn't turn to us and take a shot. He just went like this. So that's the closest I ever came to knocking one down. But we did that for, as I said, 3 tours of 8 weeks and home, and I finished those tours, came home, weighed 137 pounds, I was 6'3", and that's about my story. There's not much left.
How did you earn your Distinguished Flying Cross?
Oh, yeah, well, I didn't, gentleman asked me about the Distinguished Flying Cross. I was discharged, and I got all the guys in my squadron were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and I actually had the Air Medal, three Air Medals, and they were given to us after I was discharged. Got it in the mail. They offered the opportunity to go down to the 1st Naval District in New York and have a presentation, but that was the last thing I wanted to do, was to go down to New York and have somebody pin that on me. So that's my story. One thing I'd like to mention was that most of our missions out there were all protected by some famous Marine fighter pilots, Pappy Boyington and Joe Foss. And I can remember hearing Pappy Boyington up in the air saying, "Come on up here, you yellow-livered sons of bitches," and he challenged them to come up in the air. And I mean, we were lucky. We had a lot of good fighter cover. The Air Force was there with P-38s, and they kept us off our backs. We were just carrying merchandise, that's all. And dropping bombs. Some of the guys, I can remember, they used to tie beer bottles. We didn't have any food. I told you I only weighed 137 pounds when I came home. But they'd take 3 or 4 beer bottles, tie them together with a piece of string, and before they get into the dive, they'd throw them out. And the story was that they would whistle, you know how you blow on a bottle. They said the noise down below was eerie. Never heard of that. I've never heard it on the receiving end, but the guys used to throw a lot of them over. We didn't have food, but every once in a while we'd get 2 bottles of, what was that, 1% beer or something, 2% beer. That was always tasted pretty good. Typical food, morning, oatmeal, glass of water, piece of bread, no butter, no coffee. Lunch, if you came home at, you'd have that at 5 o'clock in the morning. Noontime, you might be having lunch. It would be dehydrated cauliflower. That's it, dehydrated cauliflower, piece of bread, sometimes dehydrated corned beef, and a glass of water. And supper was a repeat of the previous meal. And you'd go like that for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and you'd lose a lot of weight. But then when you got back down south to Australia, you could pig out and get a little bit back. But I came home weighing 137 pounds, 6'3". Light sensitive, is it?
No. Go ahead. So that's your mom?
Yeah.
And she was a
yeomanette.
in World War I?
Yeah.
What was her name?
Julia Tibbles.
How do you spell her last name?
Tibbals. Tibbles.